You guys are kidding yourself. It's not in the same arena. Of course it is. You can't have it both ways.
Pisco's a partisan hack, and this is an example of his partisan hackery.
A norm violation for which retaliation is justified.
You sound like progressive Stephen Miller. I'm not gonna lie, just the extreme aggression. Can you fight fascism by acting like fascists? That's how some Democrats want to respond after the state Supreme Court in Virginia just struck down their gerrymandering efforts. The context here is that Virginia is something of a purple state, although it leans much more Democratic these days than it once did. But after multiple red states recently gerrymandered their congressional districts to boost the Republicans' chances before the 2026 midterm election, Democratic state legislators in Virginia responded by trying to do the same. They pushed through a last-minute ballot measure that was then narrowly approved that would seek to circumvent their constitutional amendment, which required congressional districts to be drawn fairly by an independent commission. And the point of this referendum was to allow them to essentially skew their map so they could get 10-1 Democratic representation rather than the current 6-5 balance. But the state Supreme Court just struck down this referendum result, ruling on procedural grounds that the proper process and procedure wasn't followed here, so it violated the state constitution and was null and void. This isn't a partisan MAGA high court ruling. One of the justices of the 4 that ruled in favor of striking down the referendum was actually appointed with Democratic support in the state legislature. Regardless, some Democratic leaders are responding to this ruling by going absolutely ape and threatening to blow up the state of Virginia's entire system of government. As the New York Times reported, at a meeting behind closed doors featuring members of Congress, Democratic members of Congress from Virginia, and the House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries, they discussed drastic steps like possibly forcing every single justice to retire by lowering the retirement age and packing the court full of Democratic appointees, because that's a perfectly normal thing to do. In reality, packing the courts when they don't rule your way is an authoritarian tactic, and that's why you typically see it from despots in places like Hungary or Venezuela. To be fair, Democrats, while they're certainly being hyperbolic when they cry about fascism and authoritarianism under President Trump, they do have a point that he's taken some authoritarian steps, like weaponizing government to target his political opponents and trying to punish media outlets he dislikes. But is the right response to a president you say is a threat to the rule of law really to one-up him? Especially since, even without these skewed maps in Virginia, Democrats still have a very good chance of winning the midterm elections. So if you ask me, they should focus on making their case to the public, not flirt with fighting fascism by acting kind of fascist. That's just my take, and the debate is only just beginning. Let's get into it. All right, guys, welcome back to Brad versus the World. I'm now joined by the left-wing streamer and lawyer, Pisco Litty, and the right-wing YouTuber, Sean Fitzgerald, also known as Actual Justice Warrior. Guys, thank you so much for being here with me.
Thank you, Brad.
Thank you for having me.
So, Pisco, I'll come to you first. Give us your take on the Democratic gerrymandering efforts being thwarted by the state Supreme Court and whether you should really support going nuclear on the state Supreme Court as a result.
Yeah, no, thank you for having me again. And it's a really important issue, and one that even though it's probably not going to get implemented because the Democrats in Virginia, including Governor Spanberger, don't want to implement it, it's still relevant because it talks about, it references sort of our overall position on court packing generally, and the growing, I think, consensus among Democrats that it's justified, including, me, who thinks it's justified, to pack the Supreme Court of the United States. I'm in support of this measure, and I would support Virginia Democrats doing it if it were to happen. And the reason for that is simple. One is it doesn't violate what I consider to be a fundamental norm of representative government. Just like partisan gerrymandering, having a winner's edge in the context of partisan gerrymandering, no one really thinks that playing on a level playing field when it comes to partisan gerrymandering in some states, when Republicans are doing it, that it's not justified for Democrats to respond in kind. The same is true when it comes to packing the courts. If there was a Republican,
doesn't violate norms,
it doesn't. The legislatures are given the authority to court.
That doesn't mean it doesn't violate norms, though.
No. So the question is, what are you allowed to do in response to an initial norm violation? So you would agree, wouldn't you, Brad, that if the Republicans court packed a given state, that it would be justified to do it in response, correct?
Yeah, or to try to undo it in whatever way. But yes.
Correct. So no one.
They didn't pack the court in Virginia, though.
No, but in the nationwide context, right? All of this needs to be seen in a nationwide context. We're in a more national environment these days.
Can we start by talking about Virginia and then talk about maybe the Supreme Court?
No,
so in Virginia, what is the norm violation?
You're asking for the justification, and that justification is inherently related to other states.
All right,
so you can't say, well, remove. Okay, so in Utah, in Georgia, in Arizona, Republicans did a court pack. That is absolutely unrebutted. Everyone agrees that that's the case. And they did it for explicitly partisan reasons. And it is the case that the judiciary has checks on it. That includes checks from the legislature. And no one's questioning, right? And to the extent that there are questions, those will be resolved in the courts if they were to implement this, that the legislature does have that checking authority. So in response to Republican court packs, when they didn't like the results of their elections as it relates to, the decisions of their Supreme Courts when it comes to gerrymandering, the Democrats, just like they would be in the context of a gerrymander in the federal Supreme Court, which I think we had, a non-legislative gerrymander, they're allowed to respond in kind. And I think it's totally justified on that view.
All right, Sean, your take here.
Yeah, so I mean, this obviously violates the norms. I think the New York Times article said they were going to lower the age to the lowest age of a current Virginia sitting Supreme Court justice. I don't know if another state in recent history got rid of the entirety of their Supreme Court because they didn't like one specific ruling, which, by the way, they're the ones who put in this Virginia redistricting ban at the constitutional level in the first place, and they did it back in 2020, so they're immediately trying to reverse it. They didn't follow the basic procedures. Everybody knew that they weren't doing it. This is why the Republicans didn't spend as much money in the actual, ballot initiative campaign as the Democrats. We all understood that this was going to be up to the courts, and now that they lost, they're going to throw a fit. And of course, there's the national justification that, it's going to happen at the Supreme Court too, because they're losing cases at the Supreme Court because they were outmaneuvered by Republicans. By the way, part of the way they were outmaneuvered is they got rid of the filibuster for judicial nominees, so Republicans countered that by getting rid of it for Supreme Court nominees, so they were able to claim extra Supreme Court seats based on that. So yeah, this stuff backfires constantly, and it's absolutely a violation of norms to get rid of your entire Supreme Court because you don't like a decision, which, by the way, the plain reading of the Virginia law would have validated that court's appeal, or that court's ruling.
Yeah, I mean, listen, regardless, and I don't want to get too buried down into the weeds of whether or not the state Supreme Court decision in Virginia was correct, right? I know, Pisco, you're a lawyer, but the others of us are not, and I don't want to get... I think it's a more fundamental question is, what do you do when you are stymied by a high court? And I understand, I've seen you and others in kind of your ideological camp point to examples like Utah. I don't think, while I do oppose what they did in Utah in terms of adding additional justices to the state Supreme Court, it's not quite the same scenario. For example, every sitting justice was already a Republican appointed justice, and they added 2 more Republican appointed justices, which wasn't even enough because you were right, they were frustrated by the outcomes of some of decisions against them. That's not even the margin by which they were losing those cases. So I think it's an inappropriate measure that am totally against, but I don't think it's an apples to apples comparison, let alone a justification for totally nuking a state Supreme Court. You acknowledge, if they actually did this, what some of these Democratic lawmakers have come out in favor of from Virginia, and they removed, via the retirement age, every single sitting Supreme Court justice.
I think one would be left.
Maybe one would be left, and then stack the bench. You acknowledge they'd basically just be nuking the Supreme Court of Virginia.
They would be removing, it would be exactly what you're talking about. It's a form of court packing. You agree with that, don't you? It's a form of court packing.
Yes, that's court packing.
Okay, so you're saying that there's a difference between what the Democrats would do by using the retirement age versus what was done in Utah, Georgia, Arizona. And I'm asking, in virtue of what is it different?
Maximally more extreme.
Why? The question is
forcing
why,
the entire court to retire.
But no one cares about the actual composition, right? What they care about are the results. That's why people are doing these kinds of tricks,
And I just explained how the results in Utah are quite different.
No. But what is the goal in the Utah gerrymander? The goal in the Utah gerrymander is to get to partisan results, isn't it? You agree with that?
I think that was the motivation. It doesn't appear to really have worked.
So, wait, is it the goal or the result that matters? Because you're nobody cares about the goals, they care about the results. And then you're like, what is the goal in Utah? So is it the goal or the results?
So It's both. It's what the goals are and what are the results in the given states. So, but the more important thing is, what is the norm violation, right? No one in principle has a problem with increasing the number of seats on a given court or setting a retirement age. Agreed?
Doing it in a partisan way
in a
for
neutral
partisan
way,
advantage is the problem.
Okay, right. So we agree that there's nothing inherently about setting a retirement age or about adding additional members to the Supreme Court that is wrong. What's the problem is what's the motivation, right? The motivation. If you're trying to do something for a partisan edge, that's considered the impermissible rationale. And what I agree that that's not the world that I want to live in. But you have to, if you're operating in a space in which the other side is doing the same exact thing, right? By which I mean the norm-breaking nature of it is affecting the composition of the court for partisan reasons. That's, at the end of the day, the fundamental comparison, and it's apples to apples. That's back to
what that's kind of back to what I said at the beginning, though, which is fighting what you call a threat to the rule of law, and I do agree in terms of the MAGA movement in its current form, by yourself assaulting the rule of law. You would turn the Virginia State Supreme Court into a partisan joke.
When you say that it's an assault on the rule of law, is that your way of saying that it's illegal?
No, those aren't
okay. So what do you mean when you say? What do you mean when you say it's assault on the rule of law?
It utterly destroys and neuters the principle of judicial independence that allows it to serve as a legitimate check and balance in our system of government, is what I mean.
But you would be in favor of it if it was a retaliatory measure. So the harder question for you to answer is,
I'd be in favor of it if it was a retaliatory measure.
Yes, I think you granted that. So I'll ask the question then to make it simple. If it were the case that Utah did the exact same thing that's being proposed by Virginia Democrats in this context, would you be in favor of Democrats responding in kind if it were the case that they were doing that retirement age play in Utah?
No, I would be okay with them maybe trying to resolve the situation in Utah, but I don't really subscribe to the race to the bottom, two wrongs make a right style of political philosophy and strategy.
And this is what we're so sick of, right? So on that view, right, if the Republicans did a legislative a court pack in the federal Supreme Court, if they did that, if they passed the number of, in Congress and they had it approved by the president and they increased the number of seats to 13, that's Republicans, you'd be against Democrats doing it in kind.
I think they would kind of have to do it in kind, but the
question isn't whether they would have to do it. The question isn't whether they would have to do it. It's would you be okay with them doing it? And now it seems like you're suggesting you don't want to race to the bottom, so you wouldn't be in favor in the federal context of, in response to a partisan increase in the number of seats on the court, for Democrats to respond in kind. That can't be the playing field that we live in.
I think they would. I think I would ultimately be okay with them doing it, but I would, at that point, once one person packs the Supreme Court, the entire Supreme Court is cooked. So I'm trying to stop that first hurdle from getting there. I want to bring Sean in.
What I'm trying to get you to realize is it's already happened, right?
So in the context where we disagree, but we'll come back to that. I want to bring in Sean here, though.
Sure.
It's happened in another state. Like, if Democrats took control in Utah and they utilized the same process to gain back seats in terms of appointments in Utah, then that would be perfectly fine. It's the same area, it's the same arena, and the norm was broken on the other side first. If Virginia, they end up getting rid of all the Supreme Court justices, and like every 4 years, Virginia has a governor partisan flip almost every 4 years to Republicans, and then they did that, then, it's not good for the country that it keeps happening even in these state courts, but that's understandable because it's in the same arena. And in the federal context, if Democrats, they're the ones trying to expand to 13 justices, end up doing that, and then suddenly the Republicans are like, well, now we need 17 justices. I mean, it's going to ruin the Supreme Court. We should all acknowledge that. Like, you're breaking the norms, and it just basically pressures everybody into continuously doing this. That's the whole threat of court packing historically, is that you want to push the court in your direction. So it was used as an intimidation tactic by Roosevelt back in the day. But like, if you actually do it, then it undermines the judiciary completely, because if you don't like the way something's shaking down, you could just flood it with justices. We could end up in, 25 years with 100 Supreme Court justices if we go down this track. But yeah, it's in Virginia we're talking about, and it's based on a ruling that they didn't like in Virginia. You're trying to use other contexts in Utah, which again, if they fight that battle in Utah, that's one thing because norms would have been broken there, but that doesn't change the way Virginia should work.
Yeah, so I think you give the whole game away there, right? Let's focus on first what we all have agreement with. We all agree that retaliatory measures, assuming you're part of the, quote, same arena, that's justified. I wanted to make sure everyone here agrees that if we consider the same arena, whatever this means, and we'll get into that, retaliatory packing is justified, correct?
It's justifiable. I don't know if it's still
Wait,
like
wait, what's the
degrades
difference between
system in
justified
this
and
case.
justifiable?
Like you can make
that's
you
a
can make
distinction
a
I'm going to call you on.
you can make a good argument for it, but it still ends up leading
I'm asking
to a race
your
to the
view.
bottom.
I'm not. So I'm asking your view. If it's the
I
case
wouldn't-
that it's the
I
same
wouldn't
arena,
call it out,
would it
but
be
it's like
justified?
I wouldn't call it out as like some unprecedented maneuver if you're doing it back to somebody, but
That's
it
not
makes
the
the
question.
system worse.
I'm not asking would you call it one thing or the other. I'm
I'm
asking,
explaining
would you
the
think
answer. You're
it's
just like harping
justified?
on it. Just get to your overall point.
No,
Like,
no.
I would not call out. I would not call out Democrats for doing this in Utah. I would not call out if Democrats pass this, Republicans for doing
because
this
it would be
back in
justified.
Virginia.
Because it would be
it's a
justified. You wouldn't call it
because
out.
I understand the rationale, but I will say it does degrade the system, which is the broader point that I'm trying to make. But yeah, I get what you're saying. The what do you call it? Like unilateral disarmament, not a good idea. I understand. It's just justified. Like, gives it like an air of like morality.
So the question
being
is
100% clear.
only. So the question isn't what you would call out. The question isn't what you would feel someone could make a conceivably good argument about.
Yeah, okay.
The question is
guys,
only would it be justified?
I don't want you to
and
talk
that's
over
what I want
each
to
other.
ask.
I don't want you to talk over each other. Sean, like, so in this scenario that Pisco is describing, if you, for example, take for granted that Republicans pack the Supreme Court, yes or no, would Democrats be justified in doing so in retaliation?
If they actually pass the Supreme Court, it's totally justifiable to do so.
There we go.
Again,
Now
it
we can proceed
degrades
with
the
your point,
system for
Pisco.
sure. But
So
I
let's proceed.
I get the rationale, and I understand the argument about unilateral disarmament. I get all that, but I'm just saying
perfect.
it also does degrade the system to continuously do this. That's the point.
So there's only two possible distinctions then on the Virginia point, right? The two possible distinctions are as follows. A, that it's not in the right arena. So that's one.
No
And
one has
two
packed
is that
the Virginia State Supreme Court. You agree with that?
No one has packed the Virginia Supreme Court,
Okay.
as far as I know. Yes, no.
So you would be
the question is,
beginning to pack
but
it.
that's begging the question of what the right arena is. So that's one way in which you could try to distinguish the action is say it's a different arena. And then two is you could say, well, the action is just fundamentally different. Getting rid of judges is different in a way that matters than adding members of the Supreme Court. So those are the two distinctions that I've heard you guys offer. And here's to rebut them. Number one, you guys are kidding yourself. It's not in the same arena. Of course it is. You can't have it both ways. All the arguments for partisan gerrymandering when it comes to Texas, when it comes to the response to Virginia in the first place, when it comes to California, everyone understands that this is in a national context. For us to arbitrarily draw the line and say, okay, the norm violation matters, but only in the context of Virginia, or partisan gerrymandering norms only matter in the context of one state, I just don't agree with that as overall in terms of the rationale for retaliatory measures. The rationale for retaliatory measures, I think, is only arbitrarily to be limited to the jurisdiction of the state.
Do you acknowledge
I
that
don't
it's an escalation, though, to go from, for example, adding 2 Supreme Court justices, even though that wasn't really a strictly partisan thing in Utah, but even taking that at face value, adding 2. So if retaliation would be Virginia adding 2 justices, not Virginia forcing all but 1 to retire and nuking the whole court, basically. That's escalation.
It's like a proportionality critique, right? That it's not proportional, even if you grant that it's retaliatory in some sense. And
that would be a big escalation.
Okay, so I'll deal with the proportionality thing, but let's just get off the table the notion this is not partisan in nature. And to the extent that it's like, well, it's overdetermined because they're just Republicans anyway, it's to get their policy choices implemented. So regardless of whether or not it is dispositive in the overall, like, who nominated who question, that no one cares about that. What they care about are the rulings. And that's what they're trying to eschew when it comes to partisan balance. Now, on proportionality, no, I think that absolutely it's, it's not exactly the same as 2. I would agree it is intensifying it, but just because you're not required in terms of retaliation, I agree it's escalatory, but in terms of retaliation, I don't think that only things that are exactly the same are justified in retaliation. I think that you're able to go a little bit further. And this to me,
that's how you get a race to the bottom.
Yeah.
Okay, but assuming the conditions that I set out, we have agreement. Now, you guys disagree that you can consider Utah when you're considering Virginia. You want to put blinders on and say, I only consider what's happening in Virginia for the purposes of Virginia. It's a totally, in my view, arbitrary way to look at this nationwide picture on gerrymandering and when it comes to the norms of our country vis-a-vis state judges. I think it's totally abnormal to look at it that way.
Let's zoom out here a little bit.
Hold on.
Go ahead,
with the nationwide gerrymandering, like, neither of us are bringing up California, which followed their own constitution. They ended up passing their gerrymandering in response to Texas. And, like, we're not arguing that because they're not taking the extra step of basically eliminating any even perceived independence in their judiciary judiciary in order to secure a short-term victory. Like, Virginia had a process. They could have done this before, but you had Spanberger, in part, campaigning on her not doing this. She said this prior to the election back in 2025. And then they decided to rush it through during the period of time where they already had mail-in voting, and it ended up undermining them. So, like, that was the issue that they had, or early voting if it wasn't mail-in voting. So, excuse me for getting that wrong.
Yeah. No, that's the merits of the opinion, and I couldn't disagree more on the merits of the procedural issue, but I don't want to get
let's not go
there.
down. Yeah, let's not go down that lane.
But what you did there when you said about California, that's beautiful what you just said there, Sean, because you're giving the game away, right? Because we would all agree that California, the context in which partisan gerrymandering retaliation is justified in California, is in virtue of what happened in Texas, right?
Well,
so
let me ask Sean that directly, actually.
Yeah.
So do you acknowledge, because I would say that I do think this is true, that President Trump started this current race to the bottom, and I think we got to do something about partisan gerrymandering broadly. It's a huge, horrific, awful practice. But it seems to me that President Trump started the current race to the bottom, or Republicans broadly did, by pressuring Texas to try to stop themselves from, bleeding out in 2026. Sean, do you acknowledge that?
No, because the Democrats did this in New York. They ended up setting up a nonpartisan gerrymandering commission back in 2013. It was one of Andrew Cuomo's achievements. And the reason they set it up is because Republicans used to control the New York State Senate for the longest time. Then the progressive wave comes in 2019 and 2021. And when it comes to actually do the nonpartisan gerrymandering, what do? They try to pass a partisan map. A court strikes it down. They set up a map that they use for 2022. Then the Democrats fight against that, and they did redistricting, and they'll say it was slight, but it was all advantageous toward Democratic candidates, even though the judges actually set up one of the most competitive maps that we had in the entire country. They altered that in 2024 in order to advantage Democrats in response to the changing political landscape that they had. So the idea that this wasn't a thing that was happening, obviously Trump just made it blunt. He said directly he wanted 5 seats, and that set off this new wave. But the idea that we didn't already have this and Democrats weren't already better at this is ridiculous. Massachusetts for 30 years will not have a Republican member in the House of Representatives. That's 10, and then eventually, because they lost a seat, 9 seats that will be completely Democrat for 30 straight years after this election cycle. They've been better at this for a very long time.
Okay, Pisco, a response to that.
Yeah, sure, 100%. So listen, we can dispute when to start the track, right? It kind of reminds me of the conversations about the war in Gaza. And people are like, well, do we start at October 7th? Do we stop before that? At a certain point, I will dispute the notion of who's worse on gerrymandering and when it started, but it's beside the point. Look at what Sean is doing. What Sean is doing is, as part of the questioning and assessing of the normative issue when it comes to partisan gerrymandering, he's considering the conduct of other states. Because of course you consider the conduct of other states when it's an issue that affects all of us. And that's in the context of state rules on partisan gerrymandering. That's in the context of state decisions from state Supreme Courts on the same issue. And so, of course, that's proving my point that when it comes to these issues, it's artificial to put up barriers and be like, well, no, when it comes to partisan gerrymandering, it's okay for norm violations to consider the conduct of other states, but not when it comes to court packing. What explains that? That's what I'm trying to show, and what you guys are implicitly accepting by considering the conduct of other states when it comes to norm violations for partisan gerrymandering.
Pisco, and I'm going to zoom us along here and talk about the national Supreme Court packing. I'm struck by this. When I hear you talk about this rationale, you sound like progressive Stephen Miller. I'm not going to lie, just the extreme aggression towards the judiciary and wanting to escalate in ways that would clearly destroy judicial independence. Do you understand the drastic implications of what you are suggesting with packing the United States Supreme Court?
No, because listen, I don't think it's drastic because I believe the U.S. Supreme Court has already been packed. Okay, and I'll explain why that is. Did I miss the part where they added justices? So that's where you're wrong, right? That's where you're wrong. Court packing is not just adding members to the Supreme Court. There are other ways you can court pack. We just proved it, right? Because we acknowledge that getting everyone retired isn't adding to the number of seats available in the given state in Virginia if that were to be implemented. So there's legislative court packing and there's non-legislative court packing. There's also proposals to impeach, which by the way I don't support, against people like Clarence Thomas and Samuel Lee. I don't support those efforts to impeach because I think that there's a constitutional standard. There are limits here, 100%, and I still have limits in terms of some guardrail principles. But when it comes to court packing, if you were to be convinced that what Mitch McConnell and Republicans did in 2015, 2016, 2017 was court packing, then it would be justified by the very same rationale that you
what I
already
would
granted.
say, Pisco, that I don't think
retaliatory court packing.
I think at
Yeah, it's
most,
not.
because I do think what they did was wrong, and we can talk about it. At most, first off, I would say it's a great excuse for Democrats to be justified in blocking after they win the midterms, which I do believe they will, blocking any
Because of
Supreme Court
retaliation,
nominee.
right? Because it
That would be fair
retaliation.
because you're responding in kind. However, at most, even with your own framework would justify adding one justice, not expanding it to 11 to skew the balance. And more importantly, I don't believe that what Mitch McConnell did in 2017, while I do think it was wrong, is worth destroying the
worse.
Supreme Court as we know it.
So let me
Court
talk about
packing
that.
would start an escalatory spiral of packing, then packing, then packing that would lead to the Supreme Court losing all legitimacy and we basically no longer having a functioning third branch of government.
Yeah, so what I'm trying to say to you is what Mitch McConnell did is worse than legislative court packing. Why? Because what Mitch McConnell did, everyone agrees he had the power to do, right? And no one disputes that Congress has the power to increase the number of seats on the Supreme Court. No one here disputes that, right? So in terms of a powers question, what Mitch McConnell did as Senate Majority Leader, and then going back on his precedent, was totally within his power. So 1-to-1 power. The only difference is, the only reason in which they're substantially the same is because what was the goal? The goal was to affect the partisan balance of the court through a norm violation. And everyone agrees both were norm violations, right? And if you want to say, well, they did something, similar in the past with not having hearings, you can point to instances in the past when they were court packing by the U.S. Congress, all right? So why is it more virtuous to do legislative court packing than discretionary non-hearing court packing, non-legislative court packing? The reason is as follows. At least when it comes to legislative court packing, you have the virtue of bicameralism and presentment. And what you present as a negative, that is to say, the ratchet, the back and forth, that's a virtue. The fact that you can have a legislative
That's
court
a
packing...
virtue.
It is a
leads
virtue.
to a point where there's 100 members of the Supreme Court.
I'll tell you why.
And it becomes a joke, and presidents will just disregard its rulings eventually.
I'll tell you
and
why
we'll
it's
be
a
in
virtue.
Better or worse place.
You might be befuddled by it, but it is a virtue. And the reason is the fact that it's more peculiar circumstances to do what Mitch McConnell did. You need to have this situation in which the president is in control and you have a Senate of the other party. That means that there isn't parity in terms of the options available to both sides. And so it's uneven on that view. So it's more undemocratic. You don't have bicameralism. You don't have presentment to the president. And the circumstances of the non-legislative court packing are more rare and weird and more unique to the Republican majority in the Senate. And those are virtues that you can't contend with. In what sense is it better to have that than the legislative court packing? And you're like, the ratchet. Why is that worse than having a permanently skewed court one way?
Well,
John, I'll bring you in here.
Mitch McConnell used the current rules that were available to him at the time. He didn't change the rules of the game after the fact. So that's a huge difference. Like, you're trying to add in a bunch of more justices because you don't like the maneuvering within the Senate that Mitch McConnell did. So you're going to actually just flood the court with additional members. And again, in a bully tactic reminiscent of FDR, in order to force bad court precedent down the throats of the American people. Again, it's the changing up of how it's functioning. Now, I'm not saying you could never, under any circumstances, expand the Supreme Court. I actually think the Democrats' marketing team is actually pretty clever. 13 districts. We should have 13 Supreme Court justices. But we all understand that they got outmaneuvered under the current rules, and now they're trying to change the rules after the fact in order to secure their victory.
So there you see it, right? He's saying that Mitch McConnell operated within the rules. Well, I'll submit to you, it's within the rules for Congress to expand the number of seats in the Supreme Court. How can you say it's not within the rules?
Well, they would have to change the law to do it.
Of course, which they have the authority to do.
I don't think we dispute that they have the lead.
Okay, so
I will
Sean
say
is
this.
wrong on this, right?
I think they should actually take that away, and we should have a constitutional amendment to set the number of justices at 9, but we don't.
Yes. And I'm against, by the way, not following court orders. I'm against, by the way, impeaching people over nothing. I think that impeachment is a standard, and legislators are bound by it. So I'm not saying to violate the law or anything. But what we're talking about here is power. Sean says Mitch McConnell had the power discretionarily to not give a hearing to Merrick Garland and then to go back on his rule when it came to Amy Coney Barrett. Yes, he had the authority to do that. Did you hear the term he used? Outplayed the Democrats within the rules. changing the number of seats on the Supreme Court is within the rules. And so
It's
there's no
changing the
response to
rules,
that.
though.
Well, no, but
That
the
is the
changing
response.
of the
There's no
changing of the
like,
rules
the Senate
is within
has
the rules.
power to advise and consent related to Supreme Court justices,
And Congress has
like,
the power
not
to
holding
add
hearings.
seats.
Yeah, yes.
So
they
it's
do
1 to
have
1.
that power.
But that doesn't make it
It's
not
not
destructive
1-to-1.
and
No,
escalatory.
it's. I'm not saying that. Okay, I'm not saying that there wouldn't be a norm violation inherent. I'm granting that there would be a norm violation inherent in adding the number of seats on the Supreme Court. It's just parity on that level, right? Because there's a norm violation for Mitch McConnell. There's a norm violation for legislative court packing, and so they're retaliatory in nature. And this whole thing about, well, Mitch McConnell outplayed them. Yes, he had the power to do what he had to do.
Right.
Congress has the power to do what they want to do.
Pisco, I don't even think you dispute the fact that if they start meddling with the number of justices, it's going to start a ratcheting back and forth where that goes somewhere very dark. But I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I think my view, at least, is I view the current Supreme Court as legitimate and valid. So I would prefer to have a Supreme Court that serves as a check on the president's power, as it recently has done in the tariff case and other cases against the president that appointed many of the justices.
Because you're not sensitive to the current situation of the court, because you agree with a lot of the decisions of the Supreme Court. And listen, I'm not saying that the Supreme Court is illegitimate, by which we mean like they, I don't know, they're not binding, their order shouldn't be followed or something like that. But we're just saying that there is a partisan skew to the Supreme Court, and you're not sensitive to it. We're sensitive to it because it was a norm violation for which retaliation is justified. And and no one is answering that question. Like, what is the virtuous aspect that distinguishes what Mitch McConnell did different than what?
I did say that they could respond in kind by withholding the similar circumstance in the next 2 years.
So what sense is it not
in
in kind to respond with legislative court packing to non-legislative court packing?
Because it's 1 justice versus adding 3, first of all. That's pretty significant. It's
4.
a move.
They want to go to 13.
Oh, they want you 4. You're right.
Okay.
You don't acknowledge that that's different?
Let's make it harder for you. So let's make it harder for you. So I've already talked about proportionality. I don't think that you need to respond with the exact amount of justices. I actually think it would be 2 on this theory, just so you're aware. But even putting that aside, let's just grant that some packing is justified. If you say, like, put aside the question of proportionality.
I don't grant that, but okay.
Okay. So, but let's address that issue, right? In what sense would it be unjustified, even just for 1 seat, for what Mitch McConnell did? Why would that be unjustified when I've explained to you the virtues?
So it's breaking a new norm of meddling with the number of justices that hasn't been changed since 1896 or something like that. Now, I'm sorry, Pisco. I know that you're very passionate about this topic.
I am, yeah.
You've been able to make your case, and people can decide for themselves what they think. I'm going to move us along here. We got a lot more to cover in this panel. I'm excited to get both your thoughts on a lot of this stuff. Do make sure you're subscribed if you aren't yet, if you're new to one of our panel debates here on Brad versus the World, and hit the like button as well. Now, we're going to talk about violent crime and actually some good news that I think we all do agree is good news. So here from Axios is the headline: Violent crime rates plunge in America's biggest cities. And they highlight a number of cities here with huge drops in the homicide rate. By the numbers nationwide, homicides dropped 17.7%, robberies fell 20%, rapes declined 7%, and aggravated assaults decreased 4.8%. More from Axios here. Some of the nation's biggest cities posted especially dramatic homicide declines in the first 3 months of 2026. Among those that saw sizable percentage drops in homicide were D.C., Philadelphia, and Memphis. New York City experienced a 31% drop in homicides during Mayor Zohran Mamdani's first month in office. LA and Houston also posted declines during the same period. Now, guys, I think inevitably when something like this happens, we all agree it's good news. But then partisans are going to try to say, like, who gets credit, who gets blame, what's happening here. FBI Director Kash Patel, he came out and said, "Backing the blue matters," and shared this graph and this headline. Sean, I'll come to you first. You talk a lot about crime and safety, and you have, obviously more Republican-leaning perspectives on it. Do you believe this decrease in crime is directly attributable to the Trump administration, Republicans writ large, et cetera?
So the short answer to that is no, it's not. And the reason for that is because crime, as I've said for years, is a local issue. And you can actually look at these individual cities and see where the decline happened. Like, I'm a big fan of the Democrat state's attorney for Baltimore, Ivan Bates. He came in after Marilyn Mosby. And by the way, Baltimore essentially had their George Floyd moment with Freddie Gray back in 2015. Mosby presided over the 8 highest homicide rate years in the history of the city. Normally, when we give crime stats like this, it's the highest since the 90s. She was since the history of the city. All of a sudden, Ivan Bates comes in 2023. He starts prosecuting repeat gun offenders, teams up with the federal government under the Biden administration, and by the way, a program that's continued under the Trump administration to make sure that these people get off the streets. And we see a dramatic drop in homicides in Baltimore. Again, fully, in my opinion, attributed to Ivan Bates. Nothing to do with the Trump administration. The decline started before the Trump administration. You go to Krasner in Philadelphia, one of the worst states, or district attorneys, I believe they're called over there, one of the worst state's attorneys for 7 years. Things have changed in the country. Running on not prosecuting anybody is not as popular as it was when he's running for his 3rd term. All of a sudden, what does he do? Starts prosecuting repeat gun offenders, people that he previously let go. His last year on his 2nd term and going forward, homicides drop in Philadelphia. Now, people can attribute Memphis's drop to the National Guard being there. But again, after that incident with Tyree Nichols, homicides spiked dramatically. There was a crackdown on the local level while Biden was president. The National Guard came after that, so that's a leading trend. Similar things with DC. So no, I don't think it's a federal issue. Crime is very much a local issue. And by the way, this is why you have an outlier city that elected a more progressive DA, like Austin, Texas, where homicides are up this year. It's because the attitudes of the people in key positions of power, how they administer the police, and of course prosecutions, has much more impact than federal government policy.
Yeah, I think the serious policy questions and analysis of what actually caused this usually doesn't actually relate that much to national politics. But politically speaking, presidents just get blamed for anything that happens in the country while they're in charge, or they get credit for it. So I think we would all probably agree that it's politically a boon to President Trump to have this data come out now. But Pisco, and maybe I want to give him a small piece of credit. I guess this is anecdotal, but I used to live in Washington, D.C., and I visited it, I think, twice since President Trump's 2nd term began, and he did deploy the National Guard, something I'm not a fan of. But I will say, again, this is anecdotal and talk from other people, that I many times over the years was harassed, chased by homeless people on the street. You had people loitering. You had lots of stuff. The vibe was very different when I went back, and most of the National Guardsmen were doing nothing. They were standing around at subway entrances and such. But I wouldn't be shocked if that played some role. Anyway, your big picture take here, Pisco.
Yeah, so we can't go off vibes. I think Sean is absolutely correct. Unless there's a reason to think that the national politics, and your intuition, by the way, I'm not saying that you didn't say this, but your intuition, I think, is also correct that there needs to be an explanation for what is causing crime to go down, and from the national perspective, to make the case that, just because you're presiding over it, that therefore that you had that effect on it. We can't just have this correlation causation thing. I'll note it that Sean omitted one example here, which is, I guess, Alvin Bragg in New York City, and what's going on in New York. Oh yeah, I mean, you can talk about that right now, but I have a response after that.
Oh, I was going to say, in New York, I actually think Commissioner Tisch gets a lot of credit. The previous police commissioner in the city of New York, and by the way, New York State had problems, in my opinion, due to bail reform too, which every legislative session they kind of pare down a little bit and add a little bit more crimes that are bail eligible. But Commissioner Caban, the guy that Eric Adams had appointed before Commissioner Tisch, who's the current commissioner, this guy's twin brother was selling NYPD police protection to nightclubs. That's what he was indicted for. So it's alleged. I don't think he was convicted yet. So they were not running a high level operation. Commissioner Tisch comes in and she sends police officers into the subway. In fact, she was driving down crime so well in the year before Mamdani was elected that Mamdani, who initially wanted to throw her ass out of office, ended up keeping her on. So I think Commissioner Tisch deserves a ton of credit for that. And again, she was the key mover in that. It's different depending on the different local municipality, but of course, statewide, bail reform being pared down little by little each and every year, I think has an impact.
I'm curious, Pisco, let me get your take on this, the central point of kind of Sean's argument here. I'm somebody who's always been sympathetic to criminal justice reform. I think clearly some of it did not work out great. and some of these progressive prosecutors, do you agree, have not worked out?
I don't have enough information on any particulars, but I do know that there have been like specific legislations or regulations that I haven't agreed with in terms of what I think are like high value crimes that need to be gone after, including violent crime that people are incredibly sensitive to. So as I sit here, I don't trust myself to make that kind of empirical case. They presided over horrible policies, and that's the direct cause for a lot of the stuff. I think a lot of it is COVID, that big bump in crime that we saw in like 2020, 2021 or whatever. But I want to talk about the national environment and the effect on politics, because it goes to show you the kind of bullshit that a lot of right-wing people, I frankly have to say, were pushing in the lead up to the 2024 election. That this is all Biden's fault. That the Democrats can never preside over crime, and have no responsibility with respect to crime. But now you have a bunch of Democratic cities where their crime rates are going down. Are they going to get credit because they were, just absolutely taken to task by Republicans throughout the court, and Biden had to eat a lot of that political guilt for what they did, but now Trump is going to take credit for it, and Kash Patel is taking credit for it. Where is the parity? Where is the consistency in the analysis? I appreciate
there is
Sean,
none. There is none.
Yeah.
But to be fair, like that's just what presidents and politicians do. Stock market goes up, it's it's all me. Stock market goes down, it's the last guy, or it's just seasonal or whatever. But Sean, what's your response to the point that Pisco just made?
I think this is a fair point. Like, again, crime is a local issue, and you could make the case, although it's split in the studies, that certain consent decrees on certain departments from the federal government might make the response of the police response there worse because it hampers the police. But overall, the people who did the thing deserve credit, and it actually is bad for the country when we start attributing crime policy locally to the president, because then you don't actually diagnose the actual problem. This is why I'm a huge supporter, booster, and I might even donate money to the man of Ivan Bates, because what he's done in Baltimore it's a miracle. It's amazing what this man has done. And again, it's because of the basic theory that if somebody offends with a gun and you prosecute them, the chances of them reoffending because they're in jail or go down, because the more times you commit a crime with a gun, the more likely you are to eventually shoot and kill somebody. And it's really that simple. And I push back on the COVID thing because Baltimore saw no significant homicide increase, maybe even a slight decrease during COVID, because it was not caused by COVID. It was caused by this Black Lives Matter attitude infesting their government, which is why their homicide spike is back to 2015. A similar thing is true in New Orleans and other places that had these like BLM moments before that. It's cultural attitudes, elected officials on the local level mostly. Sometimes it's not even state policy. It's just local policy, because these are the people on the ground. And yeah, the president, Trump, Kash Patel, they should not in any way, shape, or form be grabbing credit from the deserving parties. And again, you could take credit for little operations like partnering with the local governments like Biden did with Bates and continued under Trump. But beyond that, it is very much on these local politicians for the issue of crime, because crime's a local issue.
And I want to just add one thing before we move on, which is in terms of the federal prerogatives on crime enforcement. I mean, the Trump administration gets an F. Look at the rampant corruption, the things over which they do have federal jurisdiction and where we would want a high level of enforcement, and where it's not as necessarily visible all the time, although they're making it very out and open, the kind of deals that are being done, the graft that's going on, the trades that are happening right before major policies are announced. I mean, they indicted like a Green Beret or something. Are they ever going to look at other people? But in other words, what I'm trying to say is, yes, it's good news that violent crime rates are going down, but the federal prerogative and where Trump needs to, I think, which he'll never do, because I think that they're one of the most corrupt administrations we've ever seen, where they need to focus is on the white collar crime, on the graft, on the stock trading, on the insider trading, that kind of stuff.
It's been a remark. I mean, we could do a whole nother panel on Trump coin and all the bullshit they are getting away with. And Ike Saul over at Tangle did a long form piece about the corruption allegations in the Trump administration. People should check out, and I may revisit. But I will move us along here. We're going to get to the part where you guys have previously debated on this topic, and that may come up. But obviously, the latest economic news coming out this week is not good. in fact. So here's the headline from the Wall Street Journal. Inflation soared to 3.8% in April, driven by gasoline prices. And you can see that in the graph as well. Consumer prices rose 3.8% in April from a year earlier, a clear impact of higher gas prices since the start of the war with Iran. Now, when you add this data, this latest batch of data into the analysis, it means that over the last calendar year, inflation was higher than the average increase in wages, actually. So that means you do not have real wage increases, meaning that the typical worker basically got ever so slightly poorer. Producer prices, this just came out as well, also shot up 6% month over month, which will put pressure on companies and probably lead to more consumer price increases in the coming months. Meanwhile, polling coming out from CNN, 70% of Americans disapprove of Trump's handling of the economy, a benchmark that never crossed 50% in his first term. 70% of Americans, including a majority of Republicans, say Trump's policies have driven up the cost of living in their own community. Now, look, obviously that's a CNN poll, and maybe you view them as biased, but even if you say there's a very large margin of error there, clearly it indicates a real problem and a real five-alarm fire for Republicans. Frankly, the exact opposite of what President Trump campaigned on and said he would deliver. Thankfully, he has a very politically savvy response to these concerns, incorporating them into the war with Iran conversation. Let's listen to that.
Mr. President, to what extent are Americans' financial situations motivating you to make a deal?
Not even a little bit. The only thing that matters when I'm talking about Iran, they can't have a nuclear weapon. I don't think about Americans' financial situation. I don't think about anybody. I think about one thing. We cannot let Iran have a nuclear weapon. That's all. That's the only thing that motivates.
So listen, on one level, I actually understand his point that to him, the war is entirely about national security and about nuclear weapons. Now, of course, you might have a very different view than him on the legitimacy of that concern. And I get the point that if you are concerned about nuclear, threat to the country, you're not going to be worried too much about gas prices. But gosh, that's a clip that all across the country, Democratic staffers are going to be slicing as we speak into attack ads. And I just know personally that if Biden or Harris had ever said something like that, I was on Fox many times over the years while they were in office, the anchors would have stroked out. Like they would have popped the blood vessel on live air. Sean, your thoughts? Clearly, this has to be a miscalculation by the president to speak about it like this.
Look, I mean, you can't say publicly when you're trying to negotiate with a regime that's trying to outlast you in terms of economic devastation that, yes, I am considering the domestic price of gas and the consequences in the country when I'm negotiating with them. Like, it is a terrible thing to say in terms of a negotiation tactic. But obviously, the way that's going to be read and the way that's going to be distributed is going to absolutely annihilate Trump and the Republicans politically. And in addition to that, you brought up the CNN poll. 70% from CNN. It doesn't matter. They use polling companies, and it could easily be 75%. People are not feeling any of the gains, and most of them have been wiped out in terms of the recent price increases against inflation. So yeah, I'm surprised that it's not 80%, especially when gas price up, because we all know gas price up or X commodity up that Americans see each and every day. That's when they get angry, and that's how they interact with the economy.
Yeah, Pisco, your thoughts?
Yeah, and I don't even give him that little bit of charity that you do, Brad, and that Sean has mentioned in terms of the negotiation and the overall national security threat, because Trump is clearly lying. He obviously cares about the pricing, and he's timing things according to the market, and all reports are that he wants a way to back out of this conflict in a way that saves face or whatever, presumably because he's aware of the effects on the markets, and he knows that bodes ill for him in his domestic political situation. And actually, you're seeing a lot of, I would say, pro-Israel commentary now, even though I think he's still going inevitably to escalate tensions. He doesn't know anything else, which is a little bit upset that he is seeming to be less in favor of going the full distance, as it were, with the Iran war. So my reaction to that is, yeah, it's obvious that, and unlike the crime situation, where there's a tenuous at best connection between presidential action in this context and the decrease in rates, there's a clear, obvious, direct connection between presidential action and the results here. Iran war, tariffs, immigration policy. Need I say more? And it's not just fuel prices. Core inflation rose as well.
You attribute immigration policy as well to gas prices? Just flesh that out for me.
No, not to gas prices, to inflation overall.
Oh, okay. Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. I was thinking gas.
Yeah, so those policies all have a direct, immediate, huge effect on prices, and it's sticky too. It's not as easy to, like, I don't know, lower prices the way that he's suggesting, the way he promised, and that was always, I think, pie in the sky promise. But ultimately, he's doing things to make things worse. I think the Federal Reserve is less likely now to do interest rate cuts, and yeah, it's a
which means
complete and
Americans
total
borrow more, pay more for their homes, pay more for all sorts of things, which. Listen, it's a real mess. I agree with you that he obviously does care about it. Why else would he be pushing for a federal gas tax holiday, right? Which at most I think would take 10 or 15 cents off the price. It's like a Band-Aid on a bullet hole. And it is funny to me to see many Republicans who explicitly, like, I want lower taxes in general, and I don't have super strong feelings about the gas tax one way or the other or a holiday. But it is funny how many Republican senators were on the record absolutely hard against a federal gas tax holiday under Biden, who are now literally like championing it now that it's Trump.
Or spending, by the way, overall. People will attribute the inflation, which I totally discount, this kind of the inflation under Biden, that it was a result of federal spending. But okay, if you're going to say that, they'd pass the big beautiful bill. It's like a record spending package. So if you want to talk about the effect of government spending and on prices, everything is reversed. And so the American people don't trust this administration on prices because they're bad for prices. The administration is doing bad things to the American people. And yeah, I think it's obvious, and that's why the polling is what it is.
So
John,
the largest, if you look at the charts that you had sent us in the in the lead up to this, the largest like indicator of inflation, where it ended up going up to 3.8%, which wipes out the 3.6% in wage growth, is recently, and that is attributable to the price of fuel, which impacts each and every other price. You're trying to like smuggle in, oh no, we can't have immigration policy because inflation and all these other things to cram your policy agenda there. And yeah, obviously Trump does care about the impact on the economy. My point wasn't that he isn't lying there or that he actually doesn't care. My point is that he can't say that. Like, he can't say when he's going to negotiate with Iran that he's in a crap position because
but he didn't have to say what he said in that clip
him.
Either. He could have said, I'm always fighting for Americans, but we've also got to stop the Iranian regime.
But he was saying it doesn't come.
Yeah.
He's saying it doesn't come into his mind when he's negotiating related to Iran, which is what he should say. But Trump should say it in better words. But he's Trump. He never chooses the best words. It never happens.
So all I'm trying to say there, and I take your point that, like, yeah, don't give away your negotiating position, is to the extent that there's a genuine national security trade-off, that is to say that Iran really needs to be prevented by having, from having a nuclear weapon. I think most people are saying, with respect to the aims of the American negotiators of zero enrichment, which I think is a crazy pie in the sky aim, that the only way to effectuate that is with like boots on the ground or escalations in military. So all I'm trying to say is that trade-off, the substantive trade-off, is not one that he's going to take. He's not actually going to weigh national security over prices in that context, such that he will go the full distance on the Iran war. Now, I agree, he can't come out in there and say, listen, this is where my breaking points are. But he's given a lot of false positives before. He's done a lot of posturing that I think has been negative towards the American posture in Iran. But on prices, listen, I'm not saying that you can't have immigration enforcement to keep prices low. I'm just saying the immutable and irremovable fact that the Trump policies, including cracking down on immigration enforcement, including in job sites and stuff, has an effect on prices, as do the Iran war and the fuel price increases
on immigration,
and as the tariffs.
Do you dispute that, Sean?
I don't think it's a major impact because he's been doing the enforcement against illegal immigration in his administration, and wages were up above inflation prior to this. The big shock is the fuel-related shock and all the downstream downstream impacts from that. So if it's immigration, it's marginal, completely overstated, and again, as a way to like smuggle in other parts of the agenda to go after what really is a recent shock related to the consequences of the Iran war fallout.
All right, and so you guys previously debated about this subject. Pisco sent me in this clip that I'm going to play and then give you a chance to respond, Sean.
But you talked about prices. I want to talk about that. So if prices don't come down in the next 4 years, are you going to call the policies of Donald Trump with respect to the economy a disaster?
Yeah, of course.
If they don't come down, do you expect the prices to come down?
He promised that prices would drop, and he said he was going to do things to help prices drop. So yeah, if
inflation
prices
is up.
It's February.
Yeah, what I'm telling you is,
are you still using statistics from January?
No,
like, you know how they use the egg stat that
clear.
was like the price of eggs as of January 15th?
I want to be clear.
And they blame Trump?
So I just want to be clear. You should not expect your prices to decrease. You should not expect your prices to decrease. So we'll see you again in 2 years when prices have not decreased, and where Trump, by example, is talking about and edging for these massive tariff wars. You guys saw that, right? Where he's having these fake propaganda victories where nothing of any consequence happens. And so you should not expect those prices to come down. So I'm very, very looking forward to when you post that video in 2 years saying Trump's policies are a disaster because prices have not come down.
I think you can expect some of your energy prices to come down, and that will have some downstream effects on the economy.
Oh, really?
So, Pisco, I guess what I'm wondering is, what are you looking for by bringing up this clip?
Well, I just tweeted out because I think it's incumbent on Sean to describe Trump's economic record here as a disaster. I think that, okay, 4 years haven't elapsed yet, but we're a significant way into this administration. There doesn't seem to be any sign that prices are going to come down. Inflation is up from where Biden left it. We're at what, 3.8? Was that the number out of the Labor Department today? So yeah, like where is the sign that prices are going to come down? And when do we get the mea culpa to say actually Trump was bad on prices?
Okay,
and, quote,
Sean,
a disaster.
Sean, your
So
response.
first of all, I clearly and obviously get another year because Pisco put out a 2-year timeline. Secondly, the Iran war prior to it, and you could check this for yourself. And in fact, I sent you a chart, Brad,
I
in
can
an
pull that
email
up in post.
after Pisco had indicated that he wanted to sneak this in here for a cheap victory. But I sent him a chart about how gas prices actually fell prior to the Iran war to the lowest level since 2021. And specifically in that clip, what did I say? You can expect your energy prices to come down due to energy policy. Now, of course, we have a shock in the oil prices. Depending on how this conflict resolves, we are going to see the downstream impacts of that. And if it doesn't go well, and Trump ends up blowing it or not completing the mission or leaving some deal where Iran has significant control of the Strait of Hormuz, or like we have traffic delayed in the Strait of Hormuz going forward, then yeah, in a year, which is my timetable given to me by Pisco, that would be an absolute failure. Again, that's the issue at hand. But yeah, energy prices absolutely did come down. I was 100% right all the way leading up to March of this year. And now you want to take this little snapshot right now at this moment, sneak that in here so you could get yourself a little victory. And I just want people to actually go to that debate, by the way, and go listen to how I discussed inflation and what parts I attributed to Biden, what parts I attributed to COVID, and how reasonable and wonderful I was in that discussion. And look at this guy right here who is bringing up the price of eggs. That debate was on February 17th, by the way, of 2021. So it was like less than 30 days after Trump was inaugurated. He's bringing up the price of eggs and everything and pinning it on Trump because Pisco's a partisan hack. And this is an example of his partisan hackery.
All right,
so
Pisco, your response, yeah.
My response to that is like the egg thing, the war on breakfast thing. I wrote an article, The War on Breakfast, like a second after Trump was inaugurated. It's a meme, right? So that is a self-aware critique of the kind of point at number chart and then blame Biden for the inflation that occurred under COVID. Obviously, for Trump, COVID doesn't count. For Trump, the Iran war doesn't count. We don't have to consider Trump's foreign policy when it comes to its effects on fuel prices for whatever reason. But I'm sorry, we don't live in the counterfactual where the Iran war didn't happen. The Iran war is happening, and COVID is happening. And for whatever reason, I think that we try to attribute
COVID is
Trump.
happening? Calm down there, Taylor Lorenz.
COVID did happen. COVID did happen under Trump, and we have to consider those and the relative responses to those crises when we're assessing how good they're doing on prices. And so when it comes to the Iran war, yeah, you have to include that in your calculations. And it's not just about fuel. It's about prices overall. And like I said, core inflation rose. That's excluding variable prices on like food and energy. So it's not just an issue of fuel. Overall, prices are going up,
but
do you acknowledge close to coming down?
Pisco, do you acknowledge though that if he reaches a deal next month and the price of gas goes back down, then 6-9 months out, it's not probably going to be just a perennial issue with the Trump administration?
I'm not so sure about that. So I think that the price on fuel, there are like lagging indicators in terms of the overall Strait of Hormuz picture. Iran is going to exercise sovereignty over the Strait of Hormuz. That's going to have an effect on prices because Iran's going to be taking a cut in the near future. So I don't know how that it's just so easy that we can get out of it. And to the extent that there's any escalation, which it seems like there's a decent chance there might be because they're at loggerheads on the major components here. I don't know. There's not going to be another attack on a major facility in the in the Arab states. So I'm not so sure that this is
Sean, I do
easy
get your
to
point that, prior to the Iran war, gas prices were low, but then Trump decided to do the Iran war, so you can't really just let him off the hook for it.
Well, first of all, I mean, again, Pisco gave me a 2-year timeline, so we have to wait another year for me to give the mea culpa if we're in this situation, number one. Number two, yes, he did launch the Iran war, and if it continues at its current pace, which, by the way, the ceasefire, the little stalemate that we're at right now, is actually worse than continuing the bombing, because at least that pressure's closer to a resolution in one way or another, and this delay that Trump thinks is beneficial for the economy is actually dragging inflation. But yeah, inflation is a consequence of the fuel inflation. And you can look at the chart that you sent us in the pre-production email, where the inflation passes the wage growth in the last couple of months due to the fact that fuel impacts every other price. I mean, technically everything impacts everything. That's how pricing works in an actual market economy. So yeah, he will suffer the consequences of this if he doesn't get a resolution for this. And by the way, he's suffering the consequences of not explaining the position on this in a good way. Like, you have Marco Rubio explaining a conventional weapons shield that was going to help them build nuclear weapons, but they don't make that case consistently. And I will point out that if they would point out that Iran has 60% enriched uranium, no country on earth but Iran has enriched uranium at that level without developing a nuclear bomb. And every problem that we could be facing in the Strait of Hormuz with Iran asserting sovereignty, which is illegal, by the way, it's an international waterway, which is them trying to assert sovereignty over this, could be worse if they did so with the nuclear weapon in the future. But the Trump administration isn't making that case, and they deserve political fallout from it. And yes, if this continues, inflation's going to get worse. The last major Iran-related fuel crisis that led to inflation was in the 70s, and Trump's second term could be like Jimmy Carter's. That's how it could be regarded if he doesn't get a handle over this. So yeah, absolutely, he is responsible for this 100%. I do want to point out that I did predict good energy policy that just led to a decrease in gas before this, and we'll see how it goes. It's been, 60-something days, something like that? We'll see how the resolution goes. Trump's the greatest deal maker ever. I don't know if you know that, Pisco.
I don't agree with that, but 2 quick points here. Okay, let's say that inflation gets back to 2% or whatever, like the target here. They're not coming down, right? So the promise that prices we're going to have deflation, I think the time is now to admit that was a lie, and that's not going to happen. First of all,
I said that in the clip right there, that you're not going to see broad prices going down. I said you're going to probably see energy come down, and yeah, that will lead to some things coming down, but in the normal way that certain things become cheaper in the economy, not in eggs are gonna eggs,
which is they only increase by 2%, right?
The way they get slowly, or slower than wage increases. You know what I mean?
And the second thing, I thought I heard it. Do you support this war in Iran?
I will see how it goes.
I don't. I mean, you're sort of getting yourself out of coming to a hard decision on Iran war because you want to see how it goes and read the room.
No, I what you call it. So once it's launched, I want the United States of America to win. I know it's trendy online, even in the right, to be Iran deserves to beat the evil Epstein empire or whatever stupid ass crap people are spouting about. But would I have launched it with the information available at the time? Well, they didn't give us a lot of the information at the time, so probably not. And I wouldn't have supported it at launch. But once we're in it, I'm trying to win it. That's my position on any of these conflicts.
Even if you felt it was illegal, so. Even if you felt that he doesn't have the authority to do that?
Once we're in, well, first of all, nobody declares war anymore. So yeah, in that regard, I actually hate the actual launch of these attacks because we don't ever follow the proper congressional procedures. But again, once we're in it, I'm here to see it through to the end, and I'm hoping for the best outcome for America.
That sounds like you support it. That sounds like you want America to go in all out, and you don't really care that it's illegal just because everyone has done it in a legal fashion. And so why should I listen to you on norms when it comes to, race to the bottom and anything else? If you're I don't care if we violate the Constitution.
Well, this is a norm.
No,
we just bomb countries on presidential orders.
Surely following the Constitution is more important than norms that are legal to violate.
Yes, I would love for us to go back to congressional war powers, but that's not where we've been in the United States of America for a while. And it's to such an extent that this is quite literally the norm now. They just decide to bomb a country, and it is what it is.
So I'm a fascist because I want to increase the Supreme Court, the size of it in response in a retaliatory fashion. And well, sorry, that was, to be fair to you, Brad, in the intro clip said something like, "Are you allowed to be a fascist in response to fascism?" or something like that. But so I'm someone who is like fundamentally against the rule of law. It's another term of Brad, because I
with love.
Advocating for something that's allowed under the Constitution, allowed under the rules, and it's in retaliation to another norm violation. But you're not against the rule of law when you're conceitedly supporting an action that is against the Constitution.
No, because, well, first of all, you're actually separating out the Constitution and norms. The norms are so different from the Constitution in this arena. Presidential power to move and utilize military assets has
Which is
grown
more important, the
over time.
norms or the Constitution?
So I ideally want the Constitution to be more important. I would love for every president to be restrained. But the idea that, like, I'm going to look at this right now, we're already in it, and I don't want the U.S. to get the best possible outcome because Congress didn't declare this war in the way that they should. And again, in an abstract intellectual way, I would agree with you, but like we're in it right now, and I want America to get the best outcome.
Pisco,
like the practical side of
Obama,
me.
Was Obama fundamentally at odds with the rule of law then?
Yes. When he intervened with respect to Libya, that was against the Constitution.
That's what I'm referring to,
100%. No, I grant that, and that is just clear and evident on an originalist interpretation of what the Constitution means. But the problem here is everyone's an originalist now, Brad. Everyone's an originalist now. But just to make it clear for people, it's more important to follow the Constitution. So I don't want to hear about rule of law and some kind of like, I don't know, hand-wringing about the judiciary when Sean is conceitedly in favor of an action which he concedes violates the Constitution, which is worse.
Well, wait, Pisco, are you so from Sean's framework, are you cheering for the U.S. to win or lose the war?
So I always want U.S. to win, but I thought he said that he wants the war to continue.
Sean?
No, well, I mean, I prefer for an end, but an end that's positive for the United States of America. Like once we're in it, I want the best possible.
But the war needs to stop.
I want the best. Once we're in it, I want the best possible outcome. And right now, if stopping this, like right in this moment, leaves us in a terrible position with the Iranians controlling the strait, no, I'm not in favor of stopping it on a practical
level. Even if the Constitution,
constitutionally, I agree with you. They should have declared it and all of that. But like in the Libya situation, when Obama started like the no-fly zone in Libya, which by the way is less extreme compared to what we're dealing with right here, that was unconstitutional, but like once you're doing it, you root for the best possible outcome because in the practical reality of this country going back decades, we don't declare war. We haven't declared a war since World War II.
Or statutory authorization. I'm not saying that needs to be a formal declaration of war. It needs to be Congress who does the action here. But the key point here is you're in favor of continuing an action for practical purposes that you know to violate the Constitution. In other words, continuing the war is a constitutional violation. It offends the separation of powers. And that's basically what's happening here. So you're crying about the judiciary, the powers of the judiciary being ripped to them for things that the legislature is allowed to do. But you're ripping power from Congress, and you're okay with it because of the practical consequences.
Okay, let Sean respond.
The Congress should authorize it or not authorize it. I do agree with that. But again, you're trying to pretend in that context of Virginia, where they're clearly violating a norm in Virginia by getting rid of all their Supreme Court justices over a ruling they didn't like, is equivalent to what has become.
It would be. They're not doing it.
If they did it, obviously. But like to something that is quite literally standard fare for decades in this country, which is presidential war-making power, which again, the Congress, I'm original intent guy. Everybody's on that bandwagon. I agree. 2/3 majority of both houses to declare war. That's where I'm at ideally. But once we're in it, I live in the practical reality. I'm sorry.
Seems like separation of powers only matters when it's convenient. Yeah, I do call it unprincipled. I think that if you're here advocating, I concede that it's a norm violation in the context of the Virginia
It's not a norm
situation.
violation. Oh, in the Virginia,
yes, and I agree that it's not a norm violation when it comes to the presidency, but which one's more important, right? Which one's more important, the norm violation or the constitutional violation? And in the case of Virginia, you're more worried about the norm violation than the constitutional violation. That's reverse.
Yeah, you're trying to conflate two different things, and I'm just existing in the practical reality when it comes to the federal government. Again, if we actually got to a point where war-making power was constitutionally restored, even if it's in this conflict, I would think that would be better long-term overall for the United States of America. But right now, we're already in this situation. It's already raining, and you're like, "Oh, well, where's your umbrella? You're not concerned about the umbrella." It's like, yeah, not right now at this moment. Yes,
All
true,
right, guys.
factual.
Guys, nope, we're gonna leave it there. I appreciate both of you. I appreciate the fiery debate, keeping it civil but keeping it constructive. Thank you to everybody for tuning in. Be sure to check out both Pisco and Sean's channels. Both will be linked in the description. Thank you guys so much for making the time and for the spirited debate.